I am a survivor of a mother who is a narcissist and a sociopath. Before I share the comment that I'm about to respond to, I would like to remind everybody to please be kind in the comment section, or at least be respectful of one another. I would like to make sure that we continue to keep this a safe space. I don't want to heavily moderate the comment section because we do all grow and heal together, and we have a right to speak our mind. We do not, however, have a right, at least on my page, in our community, to be rude or intentionally harmful. That being said, the comment I'm about to read is not one of those nasty comments or anything like that, but it is maybe a bit controversial. Let's get into it, shall we? Has your mother been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder? Did you attempt family therapy? I have massive regrets since my mother died. You can't make claims like that until you've actually experienced that circumstance. I'm not sure, just for full disclosure out of the gate, which video this comment was made on. So I have to assume based on things that I know I have shared. One of the things I have said in the past is that when my mother dies, it will be of great relief to me. And I do know that for a fact, and I don't have to experience it to understand it. Well, maybe I do, because I already have. When I was born, my mother was dead. She was a dead person inside, but for her ability to abuse me, destroy me, emotionally violate me, and physically assault me as well. The emotional abuse far outweighed any physical abuse that my mother ever perpetrated, not just in numbers, but in impact. The emotional abuse is what taught me about who I was and what love looked like. Love was hate, fear, anger, rage, not to be trusted. And every now and again peppered with a nice moment. Not so much with my mother, because the nice moments were always followed by something that would be bigger and badder than the nice moment. Like if she had to be nice to me for any period of time in front of people, because those were the nice moments. They didn't happen if there was no witness. The nicer she was to me, the worse she would be to me. So I was born to a dead mother. I never knew a mother's love, a mother's kindness. I never developed those feelings around my mother because of the fact that I lived in fear of her. And where fear lives, love does not exist. That is how I feel about it. When I ended up going no contact, which was over 30 years ago, and yes, there were a couple of blips in there because my mother showed up and, threw herself into my life, or attempted to, without invitation or warning. Other than those couple of little mini blips in there, I haven't had a relationship with my mother. She has been dead to me. She is a stranger to me. And I do not miss her. I do not miss anything about her. And I have no desire to interact with someone who systematically attempted to sabotage and destroy every aspect of my life and every relationship I've ever enjoyed. When my grandfather died, my grandfather molested me when I was a little girl. I lived with my grandparents for a few years. I felt relief and a bit of confusion, but I didn't feel sadness and I didn't feel love. The confusion was because I couldn't reconcile the man who I was so terrified of, who was doing those things to me, with the man that would show up. And one of my fondest memories, in a weird way, even now, almost. Yeah, no, it's not a fond memory anymore. Just work that out. See how healing works? But he one day came home with a kitten in his pocket. And 6-7-year-old me was just the happiest little girl on the planet. Until, of course, the lights go down and night sets in and, the molestation started again. And I couldn't recognize or understand how those two people existed inside this man. Like how, as a little girl, I could be so, oh my God, he's the best grandfather ever. And then be terrified of him. Until I realized that what I thought was a flash of goodness in there, it was not. That was grooming. And even with our narcissistic abusive parents, where we go, yeah, but they could be nice and there were these moments and all that, that's grooming. That isn't genuine. That's not kindness. That's nice. That's nurturing their likability. That's manipulation to make you second guess yourself, to make you think that, oh, if I'm really good, I'll get a moment of that person. That isn't a person. That is a manipulation. So when my grandfather died and I felt that relief, it let me know that when my mother dies, I will feel the same relief. In fact, I think it'll be greater. I really do. I think that that relief will be greater. I'll have to let you know when I get there. I have talked about in the past that I'm going to write an obituary, a factual one, because my narcissistic family system has decided that when they write obituaries, like for my grandparents, they're going to represent them, they did, as the loving great grandparents to my children, one of which they've never even laid eyes on in the flesh. And so I've decided that if they're going to draw me in that narcissistic family system and try to include me into that facade, I'm going to have my say so that people know that I'm not part of that system. I'm not associated with that system and the reasons why. It's not out of revenge. It's not out of vindictiveness. It's about the fact that I am a victim survivor and I'm not going to allow them to use me anymore. Period. That is me taking my power back. And I will not regret that. And just because I haven't had your experience doesn't mean that I don't know what my experience will be. I don't have any regret. And let's get to the therapy part of it and the reason why. When I was 17 years old, I had a little baby. And when she was 10 days old, social services made me go back to my mother. They didn't ask any questions. I had been a runaway living on my own since I was 13 years old. By the way, so much easier to be abused by people who don't know you instead of people who are supposed to love you. And I was one very traumatized little girl because from the beginning of time in my relationship with my mother, with my grandfather, with other abusers, because when children are abused, they are awesome prey for other abusers because we learn our body doesn't belong to us. We learn that people are not going to believe us. We're looking for love and we're compliant and we're silent and we're all of those things we were taught to be. And so all of my childhood experiences up until the point of 17 years old included abuse of one form or another, particularly emotional violence. I get home and I think that one of my aunts made some sort of movement with my mother, some sort of pressure to get her to take me to therapy because I'm the problem. You know that. The child's the problem. The damaged goods child. That was me. I was damaged goods and the family liar, by the way, in case you were wondering. How do I know that? Because my mother told me so. And I was only good for one thing. How do I know that? Because my mother told me so and my grandfather taught me so and my grandmother doubled down on it. So here's my mother taking me to therapy. How is she going to let this stuff come out? What if the therapist actually believes me? What if I get help? What if I get healthy? What does she do? I'm 17 years old. Now my baby's maybe a month old because I'd been home for a little while. And she sits down next to me on the couch in the therapist's office. And she proceeds to tell the therapist what a difficult child I was, how I had tremendous issues with sneaking and lying and manipulation, and completely smear campaigned me and eviscerated me. And I sat there quietly, looking at the floor, trying to disappear inside of myself, trying to make myself invisible and small, and just, I wanted the ground to swallow me up. This isn't a therapy session with my mother. After about, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes of this, the therapist managed to get my mother out of the room. And I don't really remember how the therapist handled it because I'm focused on the words of my mother. Things like, yeah, now she has a baby, as if to say it took 100 men to get me pregnant and I'm easy and all of that. Like all of that was in there. My mother leaves the room The therapist is asking me questions and I'm shrugging and nodding. I'm not speaking. I am terrified and embarrassed and devastated. And I've never been in a therapist's office before. This is my first therapy experience. Eventually, I go out to my mother, we get in the car and drive home. I refuse to call it home without that, in silence. My next appointment comes up. On the way there, my mother is driving me. She's looking like the good mother taking her damaged daughter to therapy. Isn't that so sweet and awesome? The conversation in the car. I know everything you say to the therapist. I pay the therapist. I know what you've said about me. I know what you're saying. I know how you're lying. And here's me, so terrified and so brainwashed and so unable to believe myself and what I know to be true, immediately questioning myself. Did I say something? What did I say? When did I say it? Did I answer a question? What happened? Going completely like, uh-oh, and shivering in the car. Shivering. Get to the therapy session. I walk into the therapist's office. I sit down on the couch. My mother's not invited into this one. I don't even know if she was invited into the first one. And I sat there in silence for the entire session. I don't know if the therapist told my mother I can't help her because she won't speak to me. I don't know what the outcome was there. All I know is I never went back again. And there is no doubt in my mind, zero, that my mother made it look like I quit therapy and I was uncooperative and being that same bad child that I've always been and how she's the victim of me. It took me 9 years, I was 17 at that time, so it took me until I was 26 or 27 years old to seek out therapy again. And I only did so because I was terrified I was going to unalive myself and abandon my children. And when I walked into my first therapist office and my first psychiatrist's appointment, I was terrified because of that experience. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The hardest. And that's what my mother did to therapy for me. And incidentally, when I went no contact with my mother, it was due to the fact that she was treating my little daughter like she was the queen of the universe, the golden child. And she was about 5 or 6 years old at this point, and my son would have been in his twos. She was treating this little baby boy of mine like he was nothing. And she was making it very clear between my two children. And maybe my son didn't understand it so much, but my daughter was understanding it to some degree. I've come to find out later, actually, that's where my daughter learned guilt from, because she felt so bad for her little brother. And for the other people around her who didn't receive the same kind of love as my mother was giving her. She recognized that as a little girl. She was teaching my children to lie to me, to be afraid of me, to doubt me. She was creating division in our relationship, or attempting to. And when I would tell my mother, don't do this thing, or please do that, or make sure you're, equalizing your relationship with my children and trying to get her to treat them with kindness and love and respect, not me. I wasn't asking for it for me because I knew I didn't deserve it, and I knew my children did. She would not alter her behavior. I asked her to go to therapy. Nope, wouldn't do it. So that answers that question, right? And I know she wouldn't go to therapy with me at that point in time because I was becoming a person who was finding her voice. I didn't know that, but I know my mother saw it. I did not tell my mother I would never speak to her again. I didn't know I would never speak to her again. I did tell my mother that if she continued treating my children this way, I would be seeing less and less of her. Like, I couldn't give her the same kind of access. She wouldn't have the kids on her own, or especially not my daughter, and all of that. So I was backing out of the relationship until it came to the point where it broke. And even at that time, I did not know that it would last the whole rest of my life. In the time that I began not having with her, the time that I was apart from her, I started to figure out that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't me that was the bad one. And then I went to therapy. So, as I was in therapy, my therapist is the one who told me that she felt that my mother had narcissistic personality disorder, and that she had antisocial personality disorder, or she might have said sociopath, because I've had different therapists along the way use different words, and psychologists and psychiatrists and all sorts of people. This person was a psychologist. My psychiatrist, independent sessions, learning about my experience, said the same thing. Every single person I have ever connected to in the psychiatric community, and I have spoken at psychiatric hospitals. So I have met a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists, psych nurses, all sorts of people who deal with mental health disorders, have unanimously, separately said exactly the same thing. So no, my mother has never, to my knowledge, received an actual formal diagnosis. But I am taking what all of these professionals, who are far more educated than I am, at their word. Because when you look at profilers, for example, like when you look at the FBI and how they profile serial killers to be able to identify them and find them. And then when they do, lo and behold, oh my gosh, they're right. And here's this person who was never formally diagnosed, yet here they have a diagnosis in connection with their patterns of behavior. And my mother's patterns of behavior, patterns of abuse, indicate that she is a sociopath and a narcissist. When I speak about narcissism or narcissistic abuse or sociopaths and whatever it is I'm sharing my experience in, unless I'm talking about my mother directly, because here's where I agree with you, or where I think you were going a little bit. When I'm talking about my experience, I talk about my mother as what I know her to be. When I'm talking about other people's experiences or sharing this in a more general way, coming from a narcissistic family system, for example, I don't label people with NPD. It's a wide spectrum. I don't label people with cluster B. I don't label people as sociopaths. I purposely do not do that because none of that is actually that important to have the formal diagnosis around when you're dealing with healing and creating boundaries and determining who you are or are not going to have a relationship with. At the end of the day, what matters the most is that the people you connect to are people who are healthy, who are loving, who are kind, and show up with all of those characteristics. And if they are toxic and they are abusive, whether they have NPD or not is not actually so relevant. Yeah, we can look at patterns of behavior and go, it looks like that. But I don't need to know definitively that my mother is a sociopath and a narcissist to know that she's a bad person that I don't deserve to have a relationship with. So I hope that gives some clarification to where it is I get my knowledge from in relationship to my mother and to my own feelings around how I know her death is going to impact me. And I'm very sorry that you live with regret around your mother. And what I want to tell you is that regardless of what you did or didn't do that you regret, you deserved a mother who treated you with the kind of love, unconditional love, kindness, and respect that would have created and supported a relationship with her. And the fact that that wasn't the case, the regret would belong to her, and it does not belong to you. And I'm very sorry that that's where you are. And I wish you all the healing and growth in the world. That's what we're here for. And I hope what I'm sharing with you right now helps you in some way. Thank you for taking the time to question and comment. And as a reminder to everyone out there, let's lead with kindness and love and care for ourselves and kindness and courtesy for others. See you soon. And thank you again.